Good morning. Welcome to 5 Minutes in Mark. Thank you for joining with us again. If you've been following along with us, we're making our way through the book of Mark, both in a daily reading and then 3 times a week with these videos of trying to help us understand some of the teaching in this great book. And today I want to take a look at Mark chapter 9, beginning in verse 2 through verse 8. This is the account that Mark gives of the transfiguration of Jesus. Now, just before that, at the end of chapter 8, Mark mentions the time when Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And in Mark chapter 8, verse, verse 30, verse 29, Peter answered and said to him, "You are the Christ." And he warned them not to tell anyone, this great confession of Peter. Now, very interestingly then, right after this, as chapter 9 begins, Mark transitions to this account that we're going to share today. Let's take a look at this starting in verse 2. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and brought them up on a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them, and his garments became radiant and exceedingly white, as no longer on earth can whiten them. Elijah appeared to them along with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah." For he did not know what to answer, for they became terrified. Then a cloud formed, overshadowing them, and a voice came out of the cloud, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." All at once they looked around and saw no one with them anymore except Jesus alone. This is a very interesting account as Jesus leaves his disciples except for these three. This inner circle, as we've seen before, where Jesus takes these three with him, and later we'll see in the garden when in his final hours he takes these three with him to pray. And so John, the Apostle John, who wrote the book of John and his 3 epistles and also the Revelation, who would, looking back in John 1:14, said, "We saw his glory," referring back to this transfiguration. Or Peter in 2 Peter there, "We were eyewitnesses when we were with him on the holy mountain," looking back across the years, remembering this experience that just burned into their minds. And then James, who is there with them, who would become the first apostle that is martyred for his faith. It's an amazing story here. So Jesus takes these three, and his appearance changes. It says he became radiant and exceedingly white, as no longer on earth can whiten them, his clothes. We know that Jesus, Paul would tell Timothy that Jesus, the resurrected Christ, ascended in heaven, who alone possesses immortality and dwells in unapproachable light, whom no man has seen or can see. Jesus cracks back, if you will, a little bit of the veil, so these three disciples see the bright light that represents the purity and the holiness of the living God, and they get a small glimpse of what the glory of Christ actually looks like. And then with him, there's a couple of guest appearances, Elijah and Moses. Elijah representing the prophets, Moses representing the law, and they stand with Jesus, and Luke tells us that they were discussing his soon departure. And Peter, in his zeal, wants to keep the moment, and so he has this idea of, let's erect 3 tabernacles. Let's just not go down. Let's just stay here and do this. This is just too wonderful. And it says that he did not know what to answer. He didn't know what to say. This was a baffling experience. And so then the voice of the Father, as that cloud of glory encapsulates them, and he says to them, "Listen to him. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." Peter, stop talking. Listen to my Son. And so it says that At that point, as this is my beloved son, listened to him, all at once they looked around and saw no one with them anymore except Jesus. What a wonderful experience they had here. The command of the Father to these three men, listen to him. That's what I want us to talk about briefly. As we go about our days, here's a question for us. Jesus' position as the Son of God calls for faith and obedience on the part of his disciples. Listen to him, he's my son. In what areas are you neglecting faith or avoiding obedience? Think of Jesus before Pilate. John gives us a record of that. And standing before Pilate, he doesn't answer any of Pilate's questions. In fact, when Pilate asks him about this, he says, don't you know I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you? Jesus' simple answer is, you'd have no authority over me unless it was given you from above. How about us? Do we submit ourselves to the authorities in our life that have been put over us? Are we living in submission to governmental authority? Do we not give answer? Do we yield as the example of our Savior? Do we submit to other authorities in our life with a yielding and proper spirit? The question for us today is, in what areas are you neglecting faith or avoiding obedience? Let's be the kind of people who will submit to him and to live in obedience to him in all things.